Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to those participating in the conference in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. My name is Blair Rutherford. I'm the director of the Institute of African Studies, and we are delighted to have this one-day conference today entitled The Legacies of Nyerere, Economies, Politics, and Solidarities in Tanzania and Beyond. Julius Nyerere, leader of Tanzania from independence in 1961 until 1985 when he retired, has been one of the most influential political figures from Africa on the national, continental, and international stages. Mwalimu, or teacher, as Nyerere was popularly known, struck an independent path for Tanzania, was a major influence in continental and regional organizations and in anti-colonial movements, and his policies and practices continue to reverberate and be the object of critical reflection today. This conference is going to continue that conversation, looking at Nyerere as a historical figure and his policies and practices and how they are interpreted and reinterpreted today. We are delighted to have a direct video link to Dar es Salaam. Carleton University and the University of Dar es Salaam has an over 30-year relationship, an exchange relationship. We have a visiting scholar that comes from University of Dar es Salaam every second year. And we have had a number of students go over to Dar es Salaam and a few students from University of Dar es Salaam to come here. I want to thank the Faculty of Public Affairs and the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, the International Development Research Center, IDRC, and the Canadian High Commission in Tanzania for the wonderful support for today's conference. We were going to start with a short video, a welcome from the President of Tanzania, His Excellency President Kikwete. Unfortunately, but understandably, he's been called off to be an African Union mediator at the Côte d'Ivoire conflict, so he was unable to do so. But we are delighted to have the Honorable Mr. Deepak Obhrai to say a few words of opening. Mr. Obhrai is a Member of Parliament for Calgary East. He is also the Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And as, if not more importantly, Mr. Obhrai was born and raised in Tanzania. So I want to welcome Mr. Obhrai.
Indeed a pleasure for me to be here. To talk to you. It's a little early in the morning before I go back to Parliament, so I'll have to, after my speech, I have to go back to Parliament. As you know, things are happening around the world that require attention. But before I start that, let me welcome Honorable Mhina, from the former Speaker of the East African Legislative Assembly. Welcome to Canada, and we're always delighted. And also that I'm always happy to see you because you're from Arusha, my former hometown, before I came over. And my friend, the Balozi from Tanzania to the United Nations. He was the High Commissioner here, and we formed strong links. And now I'm delighted he could come, although it's a little cold out here, but that's warm. And let me say I'm indeed very happy to have the students from the University of Dar es Salaam also listening to these proceedings that are taking place here. So to the University of those in Dar es Salaam, welcome. Before I start, I do have a message from the Prime Minister of Canada, the Right Stephen Harper. So let me read his message before I go and say a few remarks of my own. So it's a greeting from the Prime Minister. It is with great pleasure that I extend my warmest greetings to everyone attending the Legacies of Nyerere, Economies, Politics, and Solidarities in Tanzania and Beyond conference, and beyond a conference at the Carleton University. I'm delighted to welcome the former Speaker of the East African Assembly, the Honorable Abdulrahman Kinani, and everyone participating from the University of Dar es Salaam via the video link. Julius Nyerere had an enduring influence on African politics. The first president of the United Republic of Tanzania, he led a peaceful independence and sought to build the society of equal rights and opportunities. His legacy is widely admired and constructively debated throughout the continent and around the world. In a region fraught with conflict and struggles, Nyerere's integrity, dignity, and compassion as the leader of African liberation is a source of pride for Tanzanians and an aspiration to many beyond its borders. Tanzania has emerged as an important and influential player on the African continent. It is playing a key role in maintaining regional security and expanding trade, setting a positive example for other African nations. Canada has enjoyed a long-standing and cooperative friendship with Tanzania. The country's favorable business climate has attracted Canadian companies heavily invested in mining, energy, and infrastructure development. Our countries share a commitment to democracy, free markets, and good governance. Canada admires Tanzania's efforts to uphold these values. I am especially pleased to serve, and that is the Prime Minister, as co-chair of the UN Commission to improve global reporting, oversight, and accountability on women and children's health alongside His Excellency Jakaya Kikwete, President of Tanzania. Together, we are working to develop a rigorous accountability framework to ensure that the world meets the G8 Millennium Development Goals commitments that will save the lives of women and children. As we commemorate the achievements of the Father of the Nation, may we be inspired to build on his vision for a thriving Tanzania within a stronger Africa. Sincerely, the Right Honorable Prime Minister Stephen Harper, Prime Minister of Canada. This is the message from the Prime Minister, and of course I have my own notes here to speak here, but I think it would be foolish of me to use these notes to say what I have to say, specifically when I grew up in that part of the world during the time when President Nyerere was the president of the country. My early years of life, when I grew up, went to school at Arusha Secondary School, with the same school as the Honorable Kenyani went, as well as working for the East African community at Kilimanjaro Airport and at Dar es Salaam and Arusha Airport. It was during the time when President Nyerere was in power. And through that, I have seen with my own eyes, witnessed and experienced the policies, the vision of President Nyerere. Started, of course, we'll never forget the Saba Saba thing in Arusha, where started the Ujamaa policies. Prior to that, when President Nyerere became the president, I need to say about the legacies. I've been a parliamentarian for 14 years, looking at democratic development around the world. It comes to a point where we, as we study what is going on, we look at the trends that have taken place. One important trend that lives is the influence of the founding father, the nation. You know, the legacy he leaves behind, the influence he has in building strong democratic traditions that survive and make that country go forward. Failure to do that, we have seen time after time countries collapse. Okay? We have Pakistan, we have Uganda, we have Kaunda, we have Kenya, everything. So the influence of a founding father is extremely, very highly important. And Nyerere, when he was the instrument, father of the nation of Tanzania, left behind such a strong commitment to democracy, to honesty, to hard work, you know, asking Tanzanians, you know, to work for the nation. He was one of the very few leaders in Africa that actually put and said to all Tanzanians, you are equal, but your commitment is to the nation first. But what is even more important on this statement that I'm making is the fact when he said that Tanzania, Africa is mired in tribalism. We saw it very heavily in Kenya, in Uganda, everywhere. But it was President Nyerere in Tanzania, he said, you are Tanzanians first, then you are Mchaga or Wameru or whatever. Not also that, but the thriving Asian community was told that you are only one of the tribes of many tribes of Tanzania, but you are a Tanzanian first. A legacy that has brought peace, stability in the continent, in Tanzania. This legacy must never be forgotten. Thirdly, he never benefited from anything. He always put Tanzania first. President Nyerere's legacy has always been my country first, my people first. That legacy has endured and has made him one of the most highly respected African leaders who said, whose influence on that continent was very strong. At the time when I was growing up, President Nyerere said, my brothers and sisters in Southern Africa live under apartheid regime. It cannot happen. It cannot. I cannot be free when my brothers and sisters down in Southern Africa are not free. Therefore, I will commit Tanzania to fight the liberation wars. And Tanzania became, Dar es Salaam became one of the headquarters where all liberation movements fighting for freedom, dignity for the people of Africa was done from Dar es Salaam under the watch of President Nyerere. That, of course, had an impact because resources were now being taken away in developing the country towards fighting the liberation war. These resources, of course, was a setback in helping Tanzania. But it's important to recognize what President Nyerere said. I cannot be free if my brothers and sisters in southern Tanzania are not free. And I, of course, was living during that period of time in Tanzania. I was working also in Mbeya as an air traffic controller, and I do know quite the commitment that Tanzania made to fight the liberation war. And today, South Africa is free. Today, South Africa is free. Mozambique is free. Zimbabwe is free. All of this can go back, and Namibia is free, so can all go back to the strong support that Tanzania gave. Now, we had Kenya, we had Uganda, all these things. They all gave their moral support, but the real nuts and bolts of the liberation movement was from Tanzania under the leadership of President Nyerere. A legacy. Recognizing that legacy, when I went with the Governor General on his first ever state visit to Tanzania in 1999, I met President Nyerere. We had asked him to come because we viewed his stature as very important. We wanted him, Canada supported him, to help mediate in the Burundi, Rwanda, and Congo crisis. President Nyerere was given the statesman role to do that. Of course, unfortunately, he passed away before he could do that. But that was when I met him, specifically in Dar es Salaam, and we had a lengthy talk as to about the economic policies of Ujamaa and everything. The reason many people left. Now, for a minute, we need to talk about the Ujamaa policy. It was a great policy. There's no question about it. Okay? I mean, say you had the Tanzanian rural background of one or two villages here, farms here, all spread out. You needed to bring them together where you could provide services. Okay. That was a good one. But the other, of course, he experimented and looked at how he could help the people and went on, what shall we say, a socialist economy, state economy. He felt the state economy would give better services to the people he wanted to do with the distribution of wealth. Then he would say a free market would. Of course, we all know subsequently wherever there have been state economies tend to be inefficient, tend to be not the one that would provide what many people thought they would, providing the redistribution of wealth and to one of the reasons why state policies failed, and I can give you a prime example, is in Zambia. The Zambian mining company, state-owned company. Government started looking at state-owned companies as providing corporate social responsibility, doing more work for the government than doing the business aspect. This, of course, resulted in in state institutions become inefficient. We saw that in Tanzania. But then, here is the legacy of President Nyerere. He agreed, he admitted. He said, no, there needs to be a different direction. You know, this is a very, very rare thing, not on the continent of Africa, but around the world. Leaders saying, you know what, I take responsibility for this. He did, and he stepped down. It's a legacy that is a very powerful legacy for the continent, not of Africa, but of around the world. We look at it, we see in Latin America, we see, we can even see right now in Libya, where the leader is refusing to go despite the demands by the people. We see all these changes that are taking place in Northern Africa, is what? The demand of the people. But in Tanzania, you had a leader who said, and Tanzania has moved on very well. Canada is very happy to be partner with Tanzania. It's one of our country of focus. Canada puts tremendous amount of its goodwill, energy, helping Tanzania move forward. And, former Tanzanian I visited Tanzania on many occasions. I have seen the tremendous progress, the things that are moving, addressing the issues that is of importance for Tanzania and for Tanzanians. Now, these are the observations that I made. These are my own personal experience with President Nyerere. And I, of course, represented Canada when President Nyerere passed away on his state funeral. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed, to me, somebody who grew up at his young, informative ages under a leader who actually was a visionary leader, who had the heart of his people, who has set a fantastic example of what should be a leader, who should be a leader, putting his country first, And that is the most important legacy that is of President Nyerere. Thank you very much.
Mr. Member of Parliament, before you leave, let me thank you very much. I am so glad that you didn't read your notes and instead enlightened us with your really profound thought and feeling about this part of history that you shared. Thank you again. Excellencies, friends and scholars, welcome. I know that the people in the other room in Dar es Salaam can hear us, so let's give them a round of applause. And we can't quite hear you, but if you could wave at us, we would know that you're saying hello to us too. Would you? Hello. So, Diderot. I know most of you didn't want to hear about French philosophers, but Diderot was an 18th century French philosopher, and he said, "What a wonderful place the world would be if all of the kings were philosophers and all the philosophers were kings." And sometimes, as a university president, I turn that around and I say, what a wonderful place it would be if all of our legislators, all of our governors were teachers at heart, and all of the teachers were able to make some very good legislation. President Nyerere's name was Mwalimu, teacher, and he was a teacher before he was a legislator. This is, I think, a very important fact, because when you look at his whole career, he was teaching not only the people in his country, but the people of the world, a different way of thinking and acting. In his Declaration of Dar es Salaam, he says, "Education's purpose is the liberation of man." I think he probably meant women too. "From the restraints and limitations of ignorance and dependency. Education has to increase men's physical and mental freedom, to increase their control over themselves, their own lives, and the environment in which they live. Today, as we link two parts of the world together through technology, we show that we are controlling our environment. Today, as we bring people who have lived history and people who think about history together, we show that we can change what the future will be and make a better future for the world. Because I truly believe that what you are doing today is not just the study of one man and not just the study of the context in which he lived and the connection between the two, but the study of what can happen when a true leader lives in the world. He also said that educators do not give to another something they possess. Rather, they help learners to develop their own potential and capacity. Those that educators work with have experience and knowledge about the subjects they are interested in, although they may not realize it. And today we have some people who are indeed high commissioners, members of parliament, who are possessing great experience and knowledge, and the fact that they're bringing it to us today on this educational platform is very special, because when we link practice and experience with reflection and wisdom, we get a truly better world. So I thank you today for the project in which you are embarked, because I believe that what you are creating is a place where free thought and ideas can develop a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, President Runte, for those thoughtful words to help us start the conference. I'm now going to turn the platform over to our first chair, Regina Fupi. Regina is a master's candidate here at Carleton, the School of Linguistics and Language Studies. She's also teaching Kiswahili here at Carleton, so it's wonderful to have Regina here to chair the next panel.
All the listeners in Dar es Salaam and Carleton University, I greet you all and welcome everybody to this first conference. So we have in our first panel, we'll focus on the topic Mwalimu, the man, and his ideas. We have two honorable speakers, Amos Mhina, who is joining us via video conference from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Patricia Marsden-Dole, who is here with us here at Carleton University. For courtesy, so just for courtesy, we'll let our speaker from Dar es Salaam, Amos Mhina, to speak first, and then followed by our speaker, Patricia Marsden-Dole, who is here with us here at home at Canada. And just for a quick reminder, we'll have each speaker will have 25 minutes to present, and then we'll have 40 minutes for questions and answers, comments and suggestions. I guess it will be 35, because I'll take maybe 5 minutes. Okay, so without taking much of your time, I would like to present Amos Mhina. Amos is
thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll just give a brief introduction of him so that you can know the person who is speaking to you. So Amos Mhina is an associate professor in the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at the University of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. He graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts in Education and Master's of Arts in Political Science from the University of Dar es Salaam. He obtained a DE, Diplôme d'études approfondies, from the University of Grenoble, France, and a doctorate from the University of Pau, France. In 2009 academic year, Amos Mhina was a visiting scholar here at Carleton University. Please join me to welcome Amos Mhina.
Thank you very much. Much has been written about Nyerere, and many people here are conversant with his character, his beliefs, his ideas, and actions. And this has been illustrated by the Honorable Member of Parliament for Calgary. People have known Nyerere very closely and have written about him. That last book which I read about Nyerere was written by Mr. Kaduma, Ibrahim Kaduma, former Minister for Foreign Affairs, and who had worked very closely with Mwalimu Nyerere. So there are many insights about Nyerere which are well known, and I don't want to repeat them here because I'll be boring a lot of people. So I think what is important in this conference is an attempt at rereading Nyerere in order to see his impact during this time of our challenges. In other words, what can we take from Nyerere? What lessons did we miss? Because it seems he was so much ahead of many people. We are still learning from him. And we are now 25 years into implementation of an alternative system to that which he proposed, that is of socialism, and still we have many challenges facing us. So it is imperative, in my opinion, to try not to reproduce what he said or to reestablish the acts which he did, but to say what can we learn from the method and the intellect which he exuded in Tanzania. So as a way of introduction, I would like to say that my interest is to look at the pillars which were instituted by Mwalimu Nyerere. Pillars about ethics, pillars about lack of pomposity, pillars about hard work, and pillars about taking care of every member of the society so that no one is too rich and no one else is too poor. So this, I think, is the legacy which we need to look at now. Now, my presentation will wish to highlight on Nyerere pillars or principles found in ideas and actions of Nyerere from the time of nationalist struggles, the time of nation building, the time of support for liberation in Africa and elsewhere, and the time of quest for national development. The first thing I want about the man is that Nyerere, I think we all agree, was a humanist. So it is important to understand the belief system, his ethics, and his values. He believed in equality of all human beings, and he explained that in a very early essay which was written in 1952 about the race problem in East Africa. And the ideas about equality of all human beings will be translated into the creed of his party, TANU. And currently, some people believe that the 10 points in the creed of TANU should be made the creed for all parties in Tanzania. And it starts with the belief that all human beings are our relatives and Africa is one. So he believed, in fighting all forms of segregation, bondage, oppression, and exploitation. He believed, therefore, in distributive justice. But not that people should receive things for free. He believed that all people should work hard. But he did not believe that there is a justification for great wealth inequalities in wealth. For example, one of the reasons he gave for nationalization of buildings in 1974, where buildings at that time of more than 100,000 shillings were nationalized, was that he didn't believe that, he didn't support people sitting idle and only collecting rent. So he believed that people should work very hard and everybody should work very hard. No one should get something for free. But he didn't believe that some people can justify getting excessive riches. So Mr. Kaduma says his influence was the belief in God and his Catholicism. But I think his belief system, the source of his belief system is wider. Definitely Catholicism, yes, but also very importantly, the African traditional society. Without being syncretic, In other words, he believes he's a Catholic, and some people, of course, want to make him a saint. And I will not discuss that because it's not my purview. But he was an African, and he believed in the African traditional society, and he was very proud of that traditional society. What was needed to him was that it needed to become modern to deal with the challenges of today. But he was influenced by many things, including Western education. For example, he believed in the ideas of Plato. He brought up Plato and the philosopher king when he was discussing the question of people trying to get to the State House in Tanzania. And as you know, Plato believed the philosopher king, and the philosopher king was not supposed to have worldly material things when the philosopher king was in power. So he believed, and he lived frugal life, simple life, African life when he was in power. So it's important to appreciate the relationship between African traditional society and modernity in the ideas and practice of Nyerere. I think the challenge in Africa today is how people can pursue modernity and remain Africans. How people can pursue modernity and think from the point of view of an African with the two solid feet in Africa. And Nyerere put it very clearly in his writings, and he was rooted in African culture, and this was reflected in his personal lifestyle. And of course, after he retired from State House, he went back to the village, growing maize and beans in his village in Butiama. So the question is, how can Africa today meet the challenges of globalization, the challenges of hardship, economic decline, and remain Africans? And I quote Nyerere here when he says, the changes must be positive. They must be initiated and shaped by Africa and not simply a reaction to events which affect Africa. So the African leaders, Africans should not just receive or react to ideas which are coming from outside. They should think and find solutions from the point of view of Africa, not be just reacting to the vagaries of the globalization. And these changes, of course, must be based on the question of social ethics in Africa. He considered it very vital in the building of a new social ethics appropriate to the development and the creation of a good, stable society in Africa. And this, therefore, he believed the ethics should be African and not ethics from outside. And his ideas about ethics were, as I said, put in practice under the Tanu Creed, which had 10 points. And people now in Tanzania have a tendency of rereading some of these documents. And the 10 points included working for the nation and all of its people, working hard to eliminate poverty, ignorance, disease, and oppression, avoiding giving and taking bribes, not using a government or political position for personal benefit, pursuing education as far as possible for the benefit of all, cooperating with others, and saying the truth and avoiding hypocrisy. Today, some Tanzanians want these issues to be implemented, especially in light of what is happening in the country today. Nyerere also believed in the principles of socialism and self-reliance. And at one time he said he was reading the Arusha Declaration almost daily. And this led to other people starting rereading the Arusha Declaration. I be one of them. I read it recently. And again, the relevance of the Arusha Declaration is being discussed in Tanzania. I think I will come to that when we discuss the issues of socialism and the economic system which he created. But the question of modernity as an African, I think, is timely and important here, to change for the better, but to remain Africans, to become modern, not through modernization, but through modernity as analyzed intellectually by Africans. And of course, Nyerere was a Pan-Africanist and a universalist, and he didn't see a contradiction in those three positions. You can be an African, you can belong to a culture, and be a Pan-Africanist. In other words, be caring about other black people throughout the world, but all other human beings in the world. What was important to him was the support and the fight against oppression, support of the poor and the fight against oppression. So this is the belief system. Belief system influenced by Catholicism, by African traditional society, by Enlightenment philosophers, Greek philosophers. But what was important is that all these influences made Nyerere an independent thinker. He was an original thinker. With all those background, he was able to intellectualize and deal with concrete problems which emerged. Concrete problem which emerged. To try and create and transform a society which he created, which he found in Tanganyika at that time and Tanzania later. For example, when we got independence, he realized that the majority of the people, about 87%, were ignorant. So Muslims, for example, were claiming that Christians were more educated than them. But Nyerere said it's not a question of Christians, yes, Muslims, yes, and we are going to deal with that, but actually it's a question that majority of Tanzanians were ignorant. Majority of Tanzania were not getting access to health and so forth. So Nyerere, therefore, was a national builder. A national builder. And this is building a nation from the challenges which existed at that time. And at the end of the day, he created a Tanzania which was different from many African countries. And I think it has been elaborated that he attacked subnational and sectarian identities. He took affirmative action concerning issues of education. For example, nationalizing some mission schools to allow students from all religions to attend, as well as reducing the gender gap. Yet he created a real Tanzanian community. A Tanzania citizen and not a subject. Many African states have subjects, they don't have citizens. In Tanzania, we have citizens. Now, there have been areas of criticism on Nyerere. For example, he took political action at that time which was considered to be authoritarian. He particularly marginalized regional economic centers, regional in the sense of within the country, as well as regional elite, in favor of national redistribution and centralized elite. In many African countries, the elites were intermediaries between the central government and the grassroots. In neighboring Kenya, for example, such leaders take the form of modern tribal chiefs. If you look at the political leaders in Kenya, essentially, they are modern tribal chiefs. Nyerere developed a system of reaching the grassroots without local intermediaries. This had its advantages and disadvantages, including, of course, the marginalization of the local government system. But Nyerere could go straight to the people and address them and educate them without passing through any leader in between. The consequences is a Tanzanian citizenship which is knowledgeable and is aware of many things. So that was a very important contribution of Nyerere as a national builder. And as people, people need to recognize, the importance of nation building, the importance of reaching direct to the people instead of passing through intermediaries who can distort the information, who can take advantage of the people. Another issue which I want to look at is the question of democracy, Nyerere on democracy. Nyerere abandoned the Westminster model and created a one-party state, which had peculiar characteristics. Dennis Martin, for example, French scholar, wrote a book and talked about invention of a political culture in Tanzania. Now, while everywhere in Africa people are talking about personal rule and dictators, Tanzania created a system which would survive even Nyerere himself. So now we have up to the fourth regime in Tanzania. In many places there were military rule, there were personal dictatorship, there are leaders who are passing over power to their children. So there was a system which was created. And there was competition in the elections, especially parliamentary elections. The criticism was that, of course, the presidential election, there was the presidential election, there was no competition. But the parliamentary elections were very competitive, and in most elections, about half of the incumbents were being thrown out and new members were coming in. So this has been an area, of course, of criticism, but some people wish to recognize that the situation in Africa at that time would not have condoned a fully fledged Westminster system. And this is something which can be discussed. The issue which, of course, need to be analyzed is whether the transition and the systems which are created through the democratic transition in Africa are qualitatively better than a system like the one Nyerere created. Because there are many challenges, elections which are contested, and as you see nowadays, people are going virtually to the street in order to get their democratic rights. So these are, I think, the issues which can be discussed in this conference. And then the question of national sovereignty. Nyerere on national sovereignty and defense. Nyerere, as I said, believed in nationalism, in Pan-Africanism, and he believed also in universalism. So he was very strong when it came to issues of national sovereignty, the sovereignty of Tanganyika, the sovereignty of Tanzania. And members of the diplomatic corps, the Honorable Ambassador will recall that Nyerere broke relations with Germany and Britain because of the question of principles. Independence of Tanzania, and that Tanzania had the right to choose their friends and no one should decide for them. So this is an issue which I think people need to recognize, that sometimes our national sovereignty, the question of independence of a nation is not taken very serious nowadays. The influence from outside is sometimes, I think, quite disturbing. When we have United States coming and making military exercises in Tanzania, people start to wonder on where Tanzania is standing today. So I think the issues of national sovereignty, while agreeing with the regional organization and international cooperation, but also the non-alignment movement is something which needs to be recognized of Mwalimu Nyerere. And then the question of self-reliance socialism. Nyerere socialism, of course, was not Marxist. It started as African socialism based on a modified African traditional society. Later, it was influenced by leftist ideas about the need to fight dependency. Yet the strategy of import substitution which he created was a failure. So what has happened is that the policy of socialism was abandoned, but also with it, the policy of self-reliance. And this self-reliance is not only economic. but also intellectual. In other words, being Africans or Tanzanians being at the center of thinking about their society, the society's well-being. So the question whether we don't need safe land. When you look at policies today in my country, you find poverty alleviation strategy, PRS, there's a policy. We find the Millennium Goals, the goals of this country, and you look for something which is originally Tanzania, you cannot find. So I think this is an area where, about the economy, because Nyerere definitely agreed about changes, about corrections, but certainly he would have had a more nationalist position concerning development in Tanzania. So what remains about Nyerere's legacy? There is a whole panel which will deal with that. I think what I can say here is very simple, that what we can take from him is not necessarily reproducing what he had said or what he had done, but to have the courage to confront our situations honestly and intellectually. Because Nyerere was permanently thinking, permanently reading, permanently writing, dealing with the issues which were emerging every day. I think that's the legacy which we need to take from Nyerere, in my opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amos, Mhina, for your informed presentation. So, dear my listeners, if you have anything, if anything comes up, just note it down at the end of the second presenter. You are going to voice it out. So now let's just move on to our second presenter, Patricia Marsden-Dole. So Patricia Marsden-Dole is a seasoned retired diplomat. She joined the Canadian Foreign Service in 1969 to 2003. In 1991 to 1994, she was appointed as a Canadian High Commissioner to Tanzania with accreditation to the Seychelles, Mauritius, and Madagascar. Despite all her responsibilities, she did not leave academics at all. She completed a Master's of Arts in Interreligious Dialogue in 2007 and is now working her way through doctorate in practical theology concerned with compassion in the Burma culture. She also serves on the boards of several organizations engaged in senior issues and volunteering with the RC Archdiocese as a social justice coordinator. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Patricia Marsden-Dole.
Thank you, and Shikamo Professor Mhina. It's good to be in dialogue with you here. So many thousands of kilometers separate us. I think a lot of us today are going to be going over the same ground. So I'm just going to give you some highlights of my own experience and the things that really struck me about Nyerere and the legacy that he left at the time when I was there from 1991 to 94. But I'll start just with a little bit of personal. My family and I arrived in Tanzania, at the airport in Dar es Salaam in 1991, and at that time, Tanzania had just begun to move, I guess, into the Western world. So we arrived at a very dusty airport on a very dusty piece of land at the outskirts of town, and no air conditioning and a few fans if we were lucky. And we came down a road that had lots of potholes in it. You had to move around the potholes. Some of them were so big. And then when we left in 1994, we left through a brand new airport, a paved road, and small businesses going up on the road going out. So even within those 3 years, the change had become visible. And a lot of that had to do with changes that were required because of issues that were related to how the economy could be managed for the benefit of all. I think everybody here is very familiar with who Julius Nyerere was, and so we don't need to probably go over that information too much, but it's important to realize that he was born in a small village, isolated village, that the kind of personality he was came out very early. When you think that he walked 26 miles from his little village of Butiama to get to school, to start school at the age of 12 in Musoma, which at that time was a small town, but at least it was a town and there were schools there. Somebody that does that and for whom that's important, coming from a very isolated village, from a very large family, is somebody very special. And that's what he proved to be through his life. After he finished at Makerere and was teaching for a while, for 3 years I think it was, he went to Edinburgh, and there he met up with some new ideas, which he brought back with him. He returned to Tanzania in 1953, and that's when he brought together lots of independent-minded Tanzanians through the Tanganyika Africa National Union, TANU. Then he became president of TANU, entered the Legislative Council in 1958, and became chief minister in 1960. Independence came in 1961, and he was elected president in 1962. He stepped down as president in 1985, but remained chair of the ruling party until 1990, and he died in 1999. The power of Julius Nyerere over active politics did not fade, though, when he left. And I'm not talking about his role in the international world. He was very much a presence. As when I was there in Tanzania, people knew he was there. And he had an old yellow Mercedes that he used to go around in. And everybody knew where he was because nobody else had a yellow Mercedes. He lived up on the Bagamoyo Road, I think that was the Bagamoyo Road. And in a very modest house. And I was quite surprised the first time I saw it because it really didn't look like very much. And you sat out on his porch and looked out over the back garden. And there was a bathtub Blessed Virgin Mary statue in the garden with the flowers. And so it was not quite the same thing as the State House. Anyway, but the thing that was important and the power that he had when I was there came to the fore in 1994 when 93-94 there was a lot of talk of corruption in the senior levels of the government, a lot of concern about it. And the diplomatic community was talking about it all the time because transparency was becoming a political issue for all of us and accountability. And everyone was concerned that what I knew at the time, both Tanzanians and the diplomatic community were very concerned about what would Nyerere think about this. And tension started to build around that question, what would Nyerere think about this? And then one morning, early in the morning, that yellow Mercedes crossed the Selangor Bridge and went off to the Bunge. And he went into the Bunge, the doors were closed behind him, and he told everybody what he thought. And I'm looking right in front of me here at somebody who was there. I'd love to know exactly how he made his point. But everybody knew that the dam, the concern had been broken. The situation was going to be back under control again. So that was 4 years after he had stepped down from control of the party, from the president of the party, or chair of the party. But his influence, his moral influence was so strong that everybody waited to see how we could solve this problem, and the only person they expected to be able to solve it was Nyerere himself. So with that in mind, I just wanted to make a few points, and I hadn't really made any kind of presentation, long academic presentation here. Canada and Tanzania, as we all know, and we'll probably hear more today, have had long-lasting relationships that go back a long way, and some of it, as we well know, was because Pierre Trudeau was very interested in the social experiment that was going on in Tanzania because he was doing it here in Canada. At the same time, the 1968 election, for those of you who were around at that time, had one of its slogans was the just society, and then the role of the state in the just society, even though he did say at the same time that the government has no role in the bedrooms of the nation. He did feel that it had something to do with the lives of the people. So there was, on that, they were very close together. They're thinking that a new way had to be found in governance. And those ties have remained for a long time through some ups and downs, and I was there when we had suddenly got the whole aid program cut. That was a rather unpleasant experience, trying to explain that to my friends in the government at the time. But thankfully, public and private investment was coming in to replace what had been the public investment. And then there was a change in government and public investment started to flow. And now we have a relationship that really is based on strong personal ties between this university, for example, and people sitting out there, way over there in Dar. So that we had strong NGO ties that had created these personal ties. And then we also had the massive business investment that has taken place in the years, and which has a lot to do with the present government's interest in the position of Tanzania as one of the aid partners. Something about his ideas, I'll just go through a few highlights there, because the topic of this panel is Mwalimu, the man and his ideas. The ones that struck me were his implementation of equality. And that was from his own experience growing up in a village where people were equal, but within the framework of a fairly heavy-handed guidance by the village elders. So it was a very structured form of equality, but it meant equality to him. So that's what he took with him through his life, into the school and then into his thinking with the Fabians at the University of Edinburgh, and then back again into Tanzania as he dealt with the issues that came forward out of independence. But his idea of, his principle of equality had to come through the whole interracial tension that was created soon after independence, the move to Africanization. What did Africanization meant? And there was a great push to say that Africanization meant for Africans, black Africans, not those who had grown up in Tanzania. And he pushed back on that, and he said that all Tanzanians are equal, no matter what their color, pink, yellow, brown, black. They were all the same. That in itself, I think, really was something that he tried to keep through the ups and downs that were to come in the years. That was always important to him. And that, although he did have there was another issue that's related to the governance of being equal. Just what do you mean by equality? And some people are always more equal than others. And that existed in Tanzanian society, and I think that Professor Mhina made mention of that himself, that there were different types of equality in Tanzania at the time while the transition was in place. Another thing that was very important that struck me was his sense that nobody needed to be rich. Everybody needed to have enough to live, but nobody needed to be rich. He was against the accumulation of personal wealth, and his idea was that wealth was a communal thing. It wasn't not the family, not the small family unit, but it was a communal attribute. And for Africa, that meant that it was at the village level, the experience of equality and the experience of wealth being larger than the family, larger than the individual, larger than the family, and it included the village. And as I lived in Tanzania and saw villagers coming in looking for somebody else from their same village to bunk in with until they could find their way, and a sense of responsibility that existed when I was there between people who were living in the city and had a job and those who were coming in from the villages and finding them and expecting to be treated as family. That said a lot to me about what Nyerere meant by equality and by wealth. And then the fact that yes, I found an interesting quote of his, expression of what he meant by socialism, when he said, "Socialism is an attitude of mind, a belief in the oneness of man and the common historical destiny of mankind. Its basis, in other words, is human equality." So when you put that principle with the one of communal wealth, you get a sense of who he was, what he brought with him from the village. And obviously his experience in the village must have been a good one because it informed his whole life. He didn't escape from the principles of his life, of his early life. He did not believe in wealth accumulation, though, which meant that he did not create a capitalist model of what he saw as a collective agricultural production. The fact that it was collective was because it was communal, but he didn't turn it into a business. He didn't have, that wasn't what his principle was, and of course the results of that were a very inadequate economic growth during that period of time. And we have to look at the way some of the farmers were paid. Some of the farmers were paid with chits, or a lot of them were paid with chits, IOUs. They got a little bit of, tiny little bit of cash from the co-op down the road after they brought all their crops down, had paid for their fertilizer, paid for their seeds if they had to buy seeds, and then they got a small IOU chit, and that meant that they were being impoverished from one year to the next. That system ultimately had to change, and it was really a responsibility. The failure was Nyerere took on himself. He said that he made that mistake, that he doesn't make the other mistakes, but that particular misunderstanding of how you produce enough wealth to share it around fairly and covering the basic costs was something that he didn't quite get right. And I think we may hear more about that today. His other thing that struck me was this whole self-reliance thing. And that started, of course, with the independence movement. But it came down to within Tanzania. Tanzania could be self-reliant, and that was at the communal, again thinking at the communal level. The communal agglomeration had to be self-reliant. After the break, and this became strong leading up to the Arusha Declaration, because there was a break with British capital in 1965, and it was after that when the result of independence and then this problem they had with the British in '65 meant that a lot of the expats left at a time when Tanzania was just beginning to find a class of experience and of education that was necessary to bring the economy and to bring the political formation of Tanzania forward. So it was out of that Arusha Declaration, in the mood, the socialist mood, political mood of the 1970s, that he became sort of the mythical hero of a whole movement of young people coming into government around, particularly through all the Western governments. He was an inspiration. He was very much seen as an inspiration, and I think is reviewed like that by people of my age today, that he had a new vision. He was a leader of a new idea, and a one of fairness and equality. Education, of course, was one of his great interests. How was he going to educate the people of Tanzania? And again, the village model came up, and that was that primary education was necessary. Everybody should be able to read and write, but not everybody needed a lot of education. What they needed to do was to know how to get on in life. And that meant that he set up an education system that was based on the realities of rural life. You had to know how to survive. You had to know how to make the village self-reliant. So education included learning how to do those basic tasks and sharing them out. Everybody in the school, as I recall it, and even that was the case when I was there, children went to school with brooms sometimes because it was their turn to clean the yard or to clean the school, but everybody had a practical task, and that was something that came very much of his own background. He didn't think that examinations and grading were terribly important. Were not as important as learning how to live together and with a modicum of education so that you could add up things, subtract things, and that you could read some literature. But a lot of it wasn't the kind of literature that you could read a fertilizer bag. And that I heard very often, that the literacy level wasn't enough to incorporate what was coming in the modern world into Tanzania through the aid which started to come again in about 1986, I think. About 84 or 86. It was in that period when Tanzania really had to come to terms with the impoverishment of the whole country. And another thing that struck me was that Nyerere was a practicing Christian, and I know Professor Mhina made some mention of that. I think that was really important. He saw himself in the same way that he saw Christ, and that was a selfless political revolutionary fighting against injustices and hypocrisies of self-interested foreign and local powers. He was really inspired with that vision of what it meant to be human. He did have this great love for the people, a sort of authoritarian kind of love, a father love. Father of the nation probably is, in an African sense, is a very strong form of leadership, and he took that part seriously. But it also came with the love of his people and a sense of responsibility for their advancement. By 1991. When I arrived, the youngest member of the cabinet, the younger members of the cabinet were starting to say that a new method was necessary, a new form of politics, a new form of economy was necessary, and that was really the beginning of the opening up of the economy, the opening up of the political system. It took a long time before a multi-party system actually started to operate, and it's still in its learning years. But we were there at the very beginning when multi-partyism was a very radical thought, and people didn't know how you moved from the CCM, and they were a bit worried about moving from the CCM. So I had the opportunity of meeting some of these new leaders. But I worked with the current president, Kikwete, when he was the Minister of Mines and Energy at the time, and he was very much a leader in opening up the economy. And it was really through him and with the support that he was able to gain in the cabinet and with the president that saw the arrival of the Canadian private sector. And that's been for good and bad, and I imagine that's one of the things that we'll be talking about today. And when I left, I know that's when he said to me, well, I'm very proud of what I've done for Tanzania, but my economic model, my sense of economics was a bit wrong. So I'll just leave with those words because I know that there will be lots of questions on some of these points. Thank you. I'd like to mention that this book interesting because it was the first biography that I had that I think came out of Tanzania. I'm sure people are writing books and autobiographies and everything else these days, but this was the first one to come out. So it was quite interesting to see somebody thinking about what their life had been through independence, through socialism, and into the market economy. So I hope that some of you have had a chance to look at that, and that the library here has a copy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for your presentation. And then we thank you, Amos in Dar es Salaam, and our listeners also there. So please, can we all applaud all our presenters again? We have heard a lot of things, a lot of ideas from the two presentations about Nyerere, and I know that a lot of you have comments, questions, ideas, or anything that comes up from your mind. So now it's time to welcome questions. The door is open for questions, comments, and suggestions. And I'll take two questions. What I will do, I'll take two questions from this room, and then two questions from Dar es Salaam, and then from our online, if we have, and then if we still have time, we'll come back again. We'll bring questions, like I'll welcome questions again. So you are all welcome for the questions and comments. For the two presenters, both presenters.
Maybe I'll start things off to get the ball rolling. Amos, in your presentation, Amos, you made mention to Nyerere's approach to meanings of sovereignty, and I think something that has been quite striking is the extent to which Nyerere was able to pursue a a fairly independent foreign policy, especially within the context of the early days of the Cold War. And I know we have a paper later today that looks historically at some of these questions of the path during the early days of the Cold War. But the point that you make about being able to break relations with the UK, break relations with Germany within the early days of the Cold War, and how striking that is. And I suppose there's an overarching question that will inform our discussions today as we look at Nyerere and legacy and the applicability of these ideas today. So the question is really, you know, quite a bit has changed within the international context since the days of Nyerere, since 1985, since the Economic Recovery Plan, the important role that the international financial institutions have played in reshaping the structures within Tanzania, but also the context within which Tanzania operates. So I think when we discuss, you know, the Mwalimu as a man and ideas and questions of sovereignty and independence, which were such central pillars, how do we reflect upon the significance of the changing context within which these ideas are implemented? To what extent does this change of context and the new environment within which Tanzania operates, the new environment within which African states operate, to what extent does that redefine an approach to the applicability of ideas like sovereignty? Do the ideas still hold given the change of context and the role that ideas such as neoliberalism and the role of the international financial institutions, do these ideas still hold with the same force? Is there still an ability to apply these ideas of sovereignty and independence in the same way, or has the context changed too radically to talk about equivalency?
Amos?
Okay. A lot of things have changed, but also a lot of things have remained the same. The issue is that the people who believe that we are not pursuing issues of principle in external relations, and also issues of national interests of Tanzania in our relation. Of course, the foreign policy of Tanzania today is talking about economic cooperation, benefit from international relations. But there are people who believe that if we take national interests first, without being inimical to others, you know, but without losing, you know, it's important to be constantly aware of what the interests of Tanzania is and the Tanzanians is. Because when you are talking of sovereignty, it's not only the national borders, it's the fact that as a leader you are elected by the constituency of Tanzanians. And therefore what is of utmost importance is the interest of these people and not the interest as defined by powerful forces from outside. So I think that sort of, you know, criticism that actually we are playing to the ideas, to the discourse, to the policies, international policies, which benefit others and not only Tanzania, but more importantly, Tanzanians. That's the first part. The second part is that, you know, Nyerere had principles about democracy, about justice, you know, about, issues of oppression. Now, when, you know, those principles are not seen in the policies, foreign policy of Tanzania, or even regional policy of Tanzania, it disturbs people. You know, the issues of principles, for example, concerning Mugabe, concerning Kenya, concerning other rulers, and people are trying to make peace, you know, about Mugabe, when this person has, you know, gone against the constitution of Zimbabwe. Nyerere would have put down the principles involved and say, This is a principle, you follow that. It's not a question of negotiating people who have broken constitution, gone against the constitutions, people who have killed their citizens, and you're trying to make peace with that. So I think the question of sovereignty is the question of principles, is also the question of taking into consideration the interests of ordinary Tanzanians.
Thank you very much.
So I'd like to thank both speakers for what I thought were very thoughtful and challenging presentations. I will be speaking to the issue I'm raising now a bit later today, but I thought I would just ask the speakers maybe to address an issue. There is, it seems, and I think rightly so, an overwhelming acknowledgement and acceptance of Nyerere's remarkable stature as an ethical leader, a leader who genuinely had the interests of his society at heart and who was guided by those principles throughout his life. And as speakers have noted, this is a remarkable fact in itself. Alongside that, there appears to be a fairly strong agreement that while he was very strong on all these matters, his economic ideas were really mistaken and a major problem. Now the question that I would ask you maybe to address is, aren't these two things more closely connected, or connected in a more complex way than that would suggest? Nyerere's thought was about trying to create a society that could retain the sovereignty in which you could exercise those ethical principles. Keynes made a statement, one of the most profound statements Keynes ever made was to say that unless the rate of interest is nationally determined, no society can pursue its favorite social experiments. And when we look at the world today, a recent UNCTAD discussion paper, people should dig it up, it's very recent, it shows a remarkable graph of the dramatic increase in equality that occurred over a 25-year period from the 50s into the mid-70s, and the exact mirror image opposite, a remarkable explosion of inequality that has occurred since, when economies were opened up, allegedly for economic efficiency grounds. The problem is that balance between efficiency and outcomes and social justice and the ability to pursue social justice, that's the balance that we have to strike. And I would just begin the discussion by saying, it is, in my view, not plausible to suggest that had Nyerere just opened the economy in the beginning, had he been smart enough to do that, then his search for justice and efficiency would have gone hand in hand. Where are the African countries that were then always described as models? Kenya, next door to Tanzania. The critics of Tanzania, the economic critics of Tanzania, constantly pointed to Kenya. Can we, standing 30 years later, can we say, well, Kenya moved from strength to strength because it pursued the right economic policies? So I would suggest that the question of what is the right balance is the one that we should maybe explore and we all need to think about.
Thank you very much. So now it's time to take
Patricia and Amos respond.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So, Amos?
I think that's a very strong point because, and of course from an economist, we have to really try to balance it. And I think the idea today which is gaining ground is the question of national capitalism. So we go back to, I think in my opinion, Nyerere and the national economy and the national resources and national property, and have a strategy which pursues, of course, capitalism because the only system at hand, but pursuing that system when thinking about the needs and the participation. The participation in the productive sector of your people is imperative. Nowadays, we have a system where the Tanzanians and other people throughout the world are observers of what is happening to an economy which they are not participating. And you can only participate when you can involve your own people. You can have a strategy, a national capitalist strategy, which, of course, takes into consideration your interests, but also aware of the global imperatives, which, of course, you need to operate in. So I think the idea of an state capitalism in the models of the East, like Japan or whatever, China, but of course, take into consideration what resources you have and what opportunities you have, I think is imperative. In Tanzania, for example, there are people who believe entering the East African community has no economic benefit for Tanzania. And Paul Collier, an economist from Oxford, in his The Bottom Billions, specifically picks up the example of Tanzania entering into economic cooperation in East Africa as an example where actually there is no benefit for Tanzania. So Tanzania needs to really to have its own priority. For example, opening up the route to Congo, opening the rail, opening the road. In other words, having a strategic interest of your country, and while you are inviting even international finance. So I think that's the really, it's a complicated issue which needs to be addressed, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a very key point you've raised. How do you balance economic and political principles? And it's important to remember where this thing got started. I mean, it got started in the 1950s and the 1960s. That's a long time ago, and the culture of the political culture of those days was very different. Even the economic structure, it was a time when it was very acceptable for the state to take some responsibility. We just, for the welfare of the people, and just look at the success of Stafford Cripps in the UK after the World War 1945. There was a demand that the state intervene and provide social justice after all of the sacrifices that had been made. So there are a lot of these pushes that go in a certain direction because things are happening in a certain pattern, and it becomes the most viable option for a while, and then things shift again. And I think you have to look at the Tanzania of the 1950s in the way that I think that Nyerere and his colleagues looked at it. Tanzania needed leadership. It didn't have any capital. The capital left when the colonial powers left, particularly after 1965. And he had to balance, how do you make people in a country feel that they belong equally to the country? How do you break down some of the old ties and yet maintain some of the indigenous social structure? And he was trying to work with both of those things. The indigenous social structure was the strength of Tanzania. And there was a lot of authoritarianism in that structure. I would very much like to hear something to the contrary, to say that the village management was liberal. I don't think it was. It followed certain practices and rules, and once you followed those, you were free. It was that kind of freedom, a structured freedom. But the economic principles, I think, where he went wrong, and you began to see it in the late 80s as he was shifting into recognizing that some forms of small-scale capitalism were essential, because it went through this really radical anti-capitalist period, and probably a lot of bureaucracy went with that too, so people were on little power trips up and down the system. And I remember hearing that people couldn't even sell oranges on the street. Well, stories like that get around, and if people believe that that's how the economy runs, it doesn't make sense. So you always have to go back to what makes good common sense at a certain period of time. And the balance between the political imperatives of the day and what was in the economy of the day that he could structure a new nation around, where he had to start creating this balance. But I think that's essentially, that's a critical question for the discussion today, is the balance. The decisions that he made in trying to balance economic and political principles with the challenges that he met in setting up a new nation. And that's quite different from where Tanzania is today. That balance has shifted again, and it's not always welcome. I mean, there are problems with the current balance between political and economic, in so far as the social is concerned, the social benefits.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So, sorry. So I'll just take. I'll take questions from there first, and then we'll come back to you if you still have time. So, Dar es Salaam.
Oh, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I am Gaudens Mpangala, professor at the University of Dar es Salaam, Institute of Development Studies. First, I must thank the organizers for inviting me to this very wonderful occasion. And then let me thank the presenters for their good presentations. For me, I would like just to make contributions on 3 important aspects concerning the ideas and the principles of Nyerere. Nyerere, as it has been pointed out, believed in the liberation of mankind. His concept of liberation meant not only liberation in Southern Africa, but the liberation of man. Man must be liberated. Now, I would like to deal with the aspects that have always appear this time as contradictions in terms of Nyerere's principles. One is the question of liberation in Southern Africa, but at the same time, he was a believer of peaceful approach to achieving independence in Africa. You see, he was a staunch believer in achieving independence through peaceful means, and then the independence of Tanganyika insisted that we must get our independence through peaceful means rather than through violence. But then when it came to Southern Africa, he said Southern Africa has to use violence. In fact, in the conference, the summit conference in Addis Ababa in 1963, he was asked a question on this aspect. You in Tanzania have pursued your independence peacefully, but now why do you want us to support your idea of supporting liberation, armed liberation in Southern Africa? And then he said, look here, in Tanzania and even in the other African countries, it was possible to achieve independence without fighting, without violence. It was possible. That's why we pursued through peaceful means. But in Southern Africa, the conditions are such that it is not possible to achieve independence through peaceful means. So where it is not possible to achieve independence through peaceful means, violence has to be used. So that's why he committed himself full-fledged to support armed liberation in Southern Africa. Another area of contradiction is this issue of his staunch support on the democracy. Staunch support on the democracy, believer in democracy. From the time of when he led the nationalist struggle for independence up to the time of independence, he said we must build democratic societies. We must build a democratic society in Tanganyika. You see? But then, nowadays, there are critics who said he was an authoritarian, he was a dictator. So that contradiction needs to be looked at. For me, I believe he was a staunch believer in democracy. That's why all his principles are on human equality, human rights, the dignity of man, and the development of man rather than the development of things. And then his way of democracy, his approach to democracy. He believed in mass democracy on the basis of the people. Mass-based democracy, or people-centered democracy. That's why he said you can't have democracy without socialism. And you can't have socialism without democracy. Because socialism would bring equality, socialism will ensure equal development of the people, socialism will make sure that really people-centered democracy will be realized. But then why people call him now, he was a dictator. We have to look things according, I don't know which country in the world which achieved democracy. In fact, sometimes I say we have been very fast in the building of democracy compared to many countries. In Western Europe, they have struggled for centuries. For centuries, struggles to build democracy. So when African countries achieve independence, immediately you expect that to achieve that democracy immediately. That is impossible. You see, you need a transition period until you reach that realization of that type of democracy. So for me, and of course, it is among the few who despite that authoritarianism, which was necessary given the transition period, he tried his level best to exercise democratic measures, for example, periodic elections every 5 years, to involve the people in electing their leaders, involving the people in participation in the villages, in village governments, village assemblies, to decide to make decisions on things which concern them. So we have to look at that aspect, principle of democracy, through a particular context. And the third aspect, contradiction, is the whole question, the aspect of the Arusha Declaration, because it was found to be irrelevant during this time of liberalization, privatization, the development of a market economy. So what happened to those who found the Arusha Declaration as irrelevant? Even the party itself put it aside in order to establish a new economy, to have a new path. So the problem is, I think, I have been impressed by this idea of balance, to striking a balance. May I believe the Arusha Declaration was not only in terms of nationalizing the economy. The Arusha Declaration had many principles. Nyerere himself said before he died that whenever I read the Arusha Declaration, I find that there is nothing wrong. It is still relevant. And so it was still relevant to the building of Tanzanian society, politically and economically. So it should not have been put aside. The basic principles, the wrong things could have been corrected. That's why all over the world people have been undergoing reforms, economic reforms, political reforms. But you don't just throw out the basic principles. The mistake we have made, Nyerere left as chairman of the party in 1990. In 1991, we had Zanzibar Declaration, which put the Arusha Declaration aside. And that's, I say, in Tanzania we have made a mistake. Reforms were necessary, certainly, given the new circumstances, the nature of economic development. It was necessary. But putting aside the Arusha Declaration, that is which is bringing us now problems. So the balance should have been struck by retaining the basic principles of the Arusha Declaration. So I thought that should be my contribution.
Thank you very much, Professor Mpangala, for your contribution. So we welcome another question or comment, suggestions from Dar es Salaam. One more question. Okay, I have question. It's not contribution. And my question focuses on development. We have many legacies of Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, but one among it was freedom and development. And according to him, he believed that development it is blinked by people.
people brought development. So what do I want to know, or what's my question is, how do these people involved in bringing about those development? And in this contemporary time, how do our leaders focuses on this issue? What advocated by by J.K. Nyerere on this issue of development? Yeah, that's my question.
Thank you very much.
Okay, great. So if I got Professor Mhina correctly, he mentioned that we should try to be modern, but then still try to remain African. And the question which stuck in my mind is that what is African in this period when you speak about the world being a globalized village? Is it our tradition? Is it our clothes? Is it our language? Or is it our skin color? And then once we can make these distinctions, that this is what sort of defines us as Africans, isn't that sort of the beginning of a roller coaster whereby we start defining ourselves by our race? Then we will go on by distinguishing ourselves in terms of regions, that we are East Africans and then they are West Africans, and then it sort of comes back to the national level where we start differentiating ourselves in terms of tribes, and then it even goes to differentiating ourselves in terms of clans, something which Mwalimu Nyerere tried to avoid. What can you say about that? I sort of agree with what Mpangala was saying, that Mwalimu Nyerere sort of emphasized the liberation of mankind, and I think if he were to speak about modernization, he would have sort of spoke about modernization of mankind and sort of remove that bad word. So can you try elaborate what you meant by saying that we have to modernize but then still try to remain African?
Okay. Okay, I don't have anything to add with Professor Mpangala. I think I agree with him. Development of the people. Development of people is that's the challenge which we are facing today. There is growth, development of certain sectors, but the people are not involved in the whole thing. As a result, majority of people, not only in Tanzania, but Africa, we have seen the Arab world, they are not involved, and it's not only for a short time, for long periods. People get their degrees, people are not involved in the economy. So it's imperative that, of course, growth definitely is important. Development of certain productive sectors is absolutely important, but certainly the involvement of ordinary people in the economy becomes imperative. And I think that's the challenge of all democracies, including Western democracies, where issues of unemployment plays a center stage in the politics of elections throughout. Now, the question of African culture. First of all, majority of Africans are living in their culture. Only a small percentage of people, probably parts of Dar es Salaam, where they are, watching CNN all the time. They don't watch local news. They eat pizza. The majority of Tanzanians, Africans, are living in their culture. And Nyerere showed us that it was extremely easy to live African culture. He was eating for his breakfast the local buns, the vitumbua, ugali, the meal with the kisamvu. That is favorite food, African food. And he went back to the villages, to his village. He was absolutely comfortable. So I think it's not a big deal about African culture. It's only the dominant group. One scholar talked about the center of the periphery, which lives life, of the first world. So what is critical is that you are first an African, you are 2 feet an African, like Nyerere, you remain African. You think about problems of Africa from your part, not from discourse which is brought to you. What is brought to you is just an input to be considered. And it's not only about Africa, it's about India. It's all these countries which are making economic stride. You are going to find that they are based on their culture. So they are very modern, they are extremely modern. They engage in the global economy. but they engage as people of a certain culture. And when you do that, therefore, the center becomes you and not outside.
Thank you very much. So, Patricia?
And I'll just finish with a very simple comment, because I think a lot of this comes back to where we are in today's world. We're trying to create and maintain local cultures in a global world, and the global culture hasn't yet been defined. We don't know what that global culture is, and so we are looking for our identity in the terms in which we see ourselves. And what's interesting is all this Facebook and Twitter stuff, while it brings lots of damage with it in terms of personal reputations and fraud and everything else, what it's doing is reinforcing over and over again how much we're all the same all around the world. So what is development? Is development in this global culture going to mean we all have to live the same way? We all need the same level of education. We all have to speak the same language. I think it's interesting that the financial collapse is the subject of Twitter and Facebook and internet blogs and everything else everywhere in the world. Everyone's concerned about this. How could so few people create such damage to so many people? And everybody's asking themselves the very same question. And how can I protect myself? So we're really at the brink of a new culture. There's a new culture emerging. It's all over the place. Nobody knows where it's going to settle yet. And somewhere we're looking, when you ask the question of Africanization, we're looking at the global. How do we make the global culture local for us? We don't know how to do it. And it's the mechanical means that are out there now with Facebook and Twitter and everything else that allow some of the damage that was created, but it's also going to be part of the solution. So I'd just like to leave it with you that we're in a position of really not knowing where we're going, I think. It's changing. It'll come down somewhere, because it always does, and then the next cycle starts again. But we are living in very interesting times as we try to accommodate to this global culture. Who am I in this global culture of how many billions of people? That's my final comment.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll take one question, and then, okay, yep.
I think she,
Okay.
yeah.
Sorry, so we were supposed to take questions online, but online we don't have anything, so we'll go back to you.
Okay, I'm Linda Freeman, professor here at Carleton in political science, and I wanted to build on your comment and also on Fred's. I think we are at a moment opening in two ways. One, of course, is the opening in North Africa. But the other is the opening after the financial crisis, where people are beginning to think again about many of Nyerere's ideas, and the much maligned ideas about national benefit. And here I think Canada has had perhaps a very mixed record. In countries like Botswana, we advised people how to negotiate with De Beers, and Botswana got a very, very much better deal than, say, Tanzania did with Barrick Gold, a Canadian corporation, where the benefits have been minimal, under 1% of revenue compared to 10% in Botswana. And it's Tanzanian lawyers like Tundu Lissu and the churches who brought this to our attention. And I think this may be a moment when his insistence that even in a globalized world, Tanzanians have to benefit from their resources. And again, to think about many of the received truths which did him down in the mid-'80s are now being re-examined. And I think for that reason, he may have a renaissance.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think it's just following up on that point, it's very interesting that Nyerere's point on the mining was he was fully aware of what the mineral strength of Tanzania was. But his self-reliance and his equality thing was not to develop the mines until Tanzanians could do it for themselves.
And he was right.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have 3 minutes left.
It's one comment.
Oh, one.
Well, I just had a brief comment, and I'm very pleased, I must say, to be interacting with the group in Tanzania. I spent 7 years, the best 7 years of my life, at the University of Dar es Salaam, and so it's a very great pleasure, albeit this technological gimmickry is one I'm not used to, but I'm very pleased to be involved at the University of Dar es Salaam again as well. And I was there from 65 to 72, the years of the Arusha Declaration, so I have some ideas about that. And we'll return to them later. So like Fred, I'm going to speak later, so I'm not going to try and monopolize the conversation now. But I will put the premise, and I think this follows on from what Linda said and what Fred has said as well, that I do think, as I will discuss later in the afternoon, that Nyerere was actually weak on democracy and on the politics. I think he actually was right the first time on economics. And I was a little surprised to find the ambassador, if I may say so, juxtaposing the politics and the economics. The fact of the matter is, I think, as Fred said, the economic choice has been a choice for an economics of inequality. These are economic choices. They are, of course, political choices as well. But I think the economic choice of the free market, so unabashedly pushed forward by our own Canadian government, accepted by the Tanzanian government, produces vast inequalities of the kind Fred is speaking about. And Nyerere said right from the start, he did, of course, change his mind, and he decided that he couldn't pull it off, a challenge to capitalism. But in fact, he was, as I say, he was right the first time, because this kind of capitalism, unbridled capitalism, does produce inequalities, and it destroys societies. Maybe in the name of globalization, but a globalization that is run by multinational corporations. And I think the question really remains there. Nyerere was wrong, I think, in various ways, as I'll discuss on politics, but he was right on economics. And we've got to get back to that question. The question of capitalism versus socialism may be, for the moment, solved historically in favor of capitalism. But the question is still very much there. In the situation of crisis, global economic crisis, we've got to get back to first principles in some of these questions and ask them all over again. And Nyerere, Mach 1, Nyerere in his first phase was asking the right kind of questions about the economy, the global economy, and he continued, in fact, till the end of his life to ask questions about the global economy. It wasn't as if he said, well, Tanzania, okay, I'll withdraw, they can do what they like, or we can do what we like. But on the other hand, he kept at various international forums saying, this system doesn't work. It produces inequality. It's bad. We can do better. And I think we still can do better. Thank you.
I'll just like to ask one question from, to Amos. There was one speaker who just asked one question, just a quick, maybe just to answer it quickly. So there was one person in Dar es Salaam who asked that Nyerere said that people should be involved in bringing development, and people should be the one who should bring development. What do you say, Amos, about that? How did Nyerere meant to say that? So maybe we should just give us a quick answer.
I think I touch on that, and I think the ways of supporting people engage in productive activities is to help the association. Unfortunately, the cooperative movement has collapsed, and the leaders are helping or assisting cooperative unions and not cooperative societies. So in this type of economy today we have in Tanzania, we have the capitalist sector, which of course need to be there if they're paying their taxes, if they're employing and so forth. But the whole range of associational life in the similar industries, in agriculture and so forth, which need to be supported. So I think that's how we involve people in the productive sector. And of course, using the wealth which accrues from maybe minerals for the benefit of natural resources and other resources for the benefit of the people. And I wish to inform Linda Freeman that actually Tundu Lissu has been elected MP, Member of Parliament, and is now in the Parliament, is breathing fire to the system. Yeah, thank you very much.
He is.
Thank you very much. Thank you, our presenters, for your good presentations and informed presentations. Thank you, listeners, for listening.